You clicked because you saw the title and knew you wanted the truth. People from Viking times survived cold that would stop hearts today. Tonight, you follow one woman named Svala. She lived in a valley where winter crushed whole farms. Her husband died in the freeze. Her son grew weak. Her home cracked under ice. Villagers thought no one lived through storms like hers. But she walked alone into deadly wind to save her family. She dug paths through frozen earth. She kept fires alive when wood snapped like thin bones. She pulled her son from a snowdrift after he fell in the dark. She stood against cold that kills in minutes today. You see her life. You follow each breath she fought to keep warm. Watch Svala now. She steps into a storm strong enough to freeze a horse. Her breath hangs in the air in hard white bursts. The fire in her home burns low. Her son sleeps in chills. She moves out into the dark cold without help. No one else walks beside her. She pulls strength from fear alone. People from that age survived cold that would stop hearts today. You follow her through each step she fought against winter. Stay close as she holds life with her bare hands. Before we begin, slow your breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let the room grow calm. If you sit under a blanket, settle deeper. If your lights feel sharp, lower them a bit. Tell me where you watch from tonight. I read each place. It shapes the next stories. If this quiet moment helps you rest, press like or subscribe when you feel ready. It supports these long nights of history and calm. Take one more slow breath. Svala waits inside her frozen home. Her son lies near the fire. Winter knocks on her door. When you settle, we follow her into the storm. Snow pressed against the longhouse walls with slow weight. The wind slid under loose boards. Frost formed thin white lines along the inner beams. Svala woke before dawn. She opened her eyes to darkness. No sound came from outside except the low groan of winter pushing against the roof. She sat up. Her breath rose in sharp white clouds. Her son, Leif, slept near the fire pit. He curled under two thin blankets. His face looked pale. His hands shook even in sleep. Svala touched his forehead. Cold. Too cold. She pulled the blanket higher around him. The fire burned low. Only small red coals remained. She needed wood. She looked toward the door. The wind pushed snow against it. The door cloth shook. The cold pressed through the edges. Svala wrapped her cloak around her shoulders. She stepped to the fire. She blew on the coals. They glowed. She added a piece of thin bark. It smoked, then caught. She added a small piece of dry wood. Flames rose a little, not enough to warm the room. Svala looked at Leif. His small breath came slow. She placed her hand on his chest. His heart beat weak. She lowered her head. "We stay warm," she whispered. "We stay alive." She stood, her knees shook from cold. She stepped to the storage corner. She lifted a small box. Inside lay two small logs, not enough for the day, not enough for the next hour. She took one and placed it near the fire. She saved the second for later. Leif stirred. He opened his eyes. "Mother," she knelt beside him. "I am here." His voice came soft. "I had a dream. I walked outside. Snow rose up to my knees." She brushed his hair from his face. "Do not walk outside." He swallowed. "It feels cold inside." She looked at the fire. "It warms soon." He moved his hand from under the blanket. She placed it back. "Keep your hands covered." He nodded. Svala rose again. She walked to the door. She pulled the thick cloth aside. Cold air hit her face like knives. She squinted against it. Snow blew in thin lines across the ground. The wind pushed hard from the north. She saw the woodpile outside. Half buried in snow, she stepped out. Her boots sank deep. The cold hit her legs. Her breath shook. She moved slow toward the woodpile. She brushed snow from the top. She found 3 logs, hard, frozen. She lifted them onto her shoulder. Her arm shook from the weight and the cold. She turned back toward the longhouse. She kept her steps steady. The wind pushed her sideways. Snow hit her face. Her eyes watered. She reached the door and stepped inside. Heat touched her face again. She placed the logs near the fire. She added 1. The flames rose higher. She warmed her hands. The sting of returning blood hurt her fingers. Leif watched her. "Mother, did you find more?" "Yes," she said. He relaxed under his blankets. Svala stepped to the pot near the hearth. She lifted the lid. Ice covered the broth inside. She held the pot near the fire. She waited until the ice melted. She stirred it with a wooden spoon. She filled a small cup and helped Leif drink. He swallowed slow. His eyes closed again. Svala sat beside him. She wrapped her cloak around both of them. She rested her chin on the top of his head. Winter settled into their valley early this year. Snow arrived 3 weeks before its usual time. Frost covered the land before hunters finished their last trips. Many homes stored food too late. Many woodpiles stayed too small. People whispered that this winter held anger. Some said old spirits walked the wind. Others said storms punished the valley. Svala listened to none of that. She knew winter did not carry anger. Winter carried weight. Winter carried cold. Winter tested homes. It pushed. It pressed. It broke what stood weak. 2 months ago, her husband Jorund walked into a storm. He wanted to bring home meat before heavy snow arrived. He followed tracks onto the frozen hill near the ridge. The wind rose. Snow fell in thick sheets. He lost his way. People found him the next morning, frozen, stiff, eyes open. Snow covered his beard. Svala stayed strong for Leif. She cut wood. She repaired the roof. She hunted small game. She dug into frozen soil for roots. She worked from dawn to dusk. But the storms grew worse. The snow piled high. She needed more than she had. Leif grew sick in the 3rd storm. His chest tightened. His voice weakened. His hands shook. Svala kept the fire burning each night. She wrapped him in every blanket they owned. She warmed stone near the fire and placed it near his feet. She stayed awake through long nights. Now this new storm pressed against their home, stronger, colder, harder. Svala stood again. She checked the small window slit. Snow blew in constant waves. She saw nothing beyond the narrow view. She stepped back. "Leif," she said softly. His eyes opened. "Yes?" "I go outside again." He blinked slow. "Do not stay long." "I return fast." He reached out his hand. She held it. His fingers felt small and cold. "I keep the fire alive," she said. He nodded and closed his eyes again. She placed 2 furs around him. She walked to the door. She wrapped her cloak tighter. She pulled the cloth aside and stepped out again. The wind pushed harder now. Snow hit her face in sharp bursts. Her cloak whipped behind her. She leaned forward and walked toward the woodpile again. Only 1 log lay near the top now. She brushed snow aside and found nothing else. She lifted the log. "This is not enough." She looked toward the edge of the yard. A line of birch trees stood there. Beyond them lay the forest, thick with pine and oak. She knew wood waited there. But snow reached waist height in some places. The wind cut through clothing. Walking far risked life. She heard Jorun's voice in her memory. "Winter respects no one." She stepped toward the birch trees. The snow deepened fast. Each step grew harder. Her boots sank. Her breath fluttered. She pressed onward. She reached the first birch trunk. She steadied herself with one hand. She looked back at the longhouse. Smoke rose in a thin line. The fire burned, but not strong. Leif needed warmth. She needed wood. She stepped into deeper snow. She moved slow. Her breath rose in white bursts. Her fingers stiffened. Her toes numbed. She reached a small fallen log near the forest edge. She brushed snow aside. The log felt frozen to the ground. She dug around it with both hands. Her fingers burned from cold. She pulled hard. The log loosened. She lifted it with effort. She looked around. She saw another branch under a thin layer of snow. She picked it up. It felt thin, but useful for kindling. She collected 2 more small pieces. Her arms shook from weight. Her face burned from cold. She turned back toward the longhouse. The wind hit her full. She lowered her head and stepped forward. Halfway back, the wind pushed so hard she lost footing. She fell to one knee. The log dropped. Snow filled her sleeve. She clenched her teeth. She grabbed the log again. She pressed onward. When she reached the door, her hands trembled. She stepped inside and dropped the wood near the hearth. She shut the door. Heat touched her skin again. She knelt by the fire and warmed her hands. Leif opened his eyes. "Mother, I am here," she said. He looked weak, his voice soft. I felt wind inside the room. "The storm pushes hard," she said. "Will the fire last?" "Yes," she said. She added the new wood. Flames rose higher. Warmth spread through the room. Leif closed his eyes again. "Good." Svala sat beside him. She placed her arm around him. He curled into her side. His breathing stayed shallow but steady. When he slept again, she stood and walked to the corner. She checked their food. A small pot of broth, a few dried fish, a pouch of barley, some dried mushrooms. Enough for 2 days if they rationed well. Enough for 1 day if the storm stayed strong. Svala looked at the door. She knew she needed more soon. But she could not risk a long trip now, not with Leif weak, not with the storm still growing. She paced the room. The cold inside the walls felt heavy. The fire warmed only the closest space. She walked to the beams. She checked for cracks. The roof held, the walls held. At least that comfort stayed. Hours passed. The storm grew louder. Snow hit the walls with sharp force. The longhouse shook. Leif woke again. His eyes looked glassy. "Mother, is it night?" "No," she said. "The storm hides the sun." He swallowed. "I feel cold inside my chest." She knelt beside him. "Breathe slow." He closed his eyes and breathed with effort. Svala lifted the pot from the fire. She poured broth into a cup. She held it to his lips. He drank. His breath steadied a little. She placed her forehead against his. "Stay strong," he nodded weakly. Svala added another log to the fire. The flames grew bright. She warmed her hands. She stared at the woodpile. Only 1 log remained. After that, nothing. She knew the truth. She needed more wood tonight, or the fire died. She stood. She grabbed her cloak. She stepped to the door. Leif whispered, "Mother, do not go far." She looked back at him. "I do not." She stepped outside. The storm raged harder. Snow flew in hard sheets. The cold struck like iron. She walked toward the birch trees again. The snow reached her waist now. She pushed through it with effort. Her breath rasped. Her fingers stiffened. She reached the first birch. She leaned on it. She looked toward the forest. The wind blew through the branches. Snow fell in thick waves. She felt fear rise. The forest looked darker than before. "Go back," she whispered to herself. Then she saw something near the tree roots. a small, narrow gap in the snow. She brushed it aside with her foot. A fallen branch lay there, thick, dry, hard. She knelt and grabbed it. She lifted it with both hands. It weighed more than she expected. She turned back toward the house. She stepped forward. Snow pushed against her legs. She forced each step. The wind screamed in her ears. She reached the longhouse. She stepped inside. She dropped the wood near the hearth. The heat touched her face again. She closed the door with shaking hands. Leafy watched her with tired eyes. "Mother," she knelt beside him. "I came back," he tried to smile. "Good." She added the thick branch to the fire. The flames rose high. Warmth spread across the room. She placed her hands around his. "You live," she whispered. "We live." Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the fire held. The storm pressed hard through the longhouse walls. Snow hissed against the roof. The wind roared in deep waves. Svala sat near the hearth with Leif's hand in hers. The fire burned strong now, but she watched it with steady fear. One night of warmth cost more wood than she liked. One long storm could take every piece she owned. Leif's breath softened. He slept again. His chest rose slow. His face warmed near the fire. His color returned a little. She brushed his cheek with her thumb. She watched him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. She stood and stepped to the window slit. Snow blew sideways in fast bursts. The trees swayed. The sky showed no break in the storm. She felt the weight of the air. Winter pressed down harder than the last two storms. This one felt deeper, older, stronger. She stepped back. She knelt near the woodpile. Only one small piece of thin wood remained. One more log lay in the corner, the thick one she found near the forest edge. After this, nothing. She needed more before night fell again. She reached for her cloak, then paused. She looked at Leif. His eyes stayed shut, his breath steady. She wanted to stay with him, but the fire ruled everything. If it died, he grew cold fast. Too fast. She whispered, "I return again." She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders. She stepped to the door. She paused one last time. Leif whispered in his sleep, "Mother." She rested her hand on his forehead. "I come back soon." He did not wake. Svala stepped outside. The cold hit her harder than before. The wind punched through her cloak. Snow flew in thick sheets. The world outside blurred. She lowered her head. She stepped toward the birch trees. Her boots sank deep. Each step took strength. The woodpile stayed buried now. Only a thin corner of the top log showed under the snow. She grabbed it. The log felt frozen and cracked. She lifted it. Snow stuck to its sides. "More," she whispered. "More." She looked toward the forest. The storm thickened. The trees shook. The path looked dangerous. But she had no choice. She stepped toward the first pine. The snow reached her waist again. She pushed through it. She used her shoulder against the wind. Her breath came fast. The cold cut her lungs. She reached the tree. She steadied herself with one hand. She looked at the ground. Snow covered everything, but she brushed aside a thick layer and found a branch, thin but dry. She grabbed it. She stepped farther from the longhouse. The forest edge lay ahead. She knew the risks. Snow hid roots. Ice hid holes. A fall could break a leg, but she moved forward. She reached the edge. The wind lowered here. The pines blocked some of it. She looked around. She saw a fallen trunk, half buried in snow. She walked toward it. She knelt. She brushed away snow. The trunk lay split in two pieces. Thick, dry, good wood. She slid her hand under the first piece. She pulled. It moved slow. Her fingers burned from cold. She pressed her shoulder under the piece and lifted. It rose. She breathed hard. Her muscles shook. She lifted the second piece. She balanced both across her arms. Her shoulders ached. She rose and stepped back toward the clearing. A sound broke through the wind. A short crack. Not wood. Something else. Something heavy moved behind a pine trunk. She froze. She turned her head slow. Snow blurred her vision. She saw nothing but shadows. She held the wood tighter. She stepped backward. The sound came again. A crunch of snow under weight. Too heavy for deer. Too slow for wolf. She whispered to herself, "Move." She turned and walked toward the longhouse. The wood felt heavy in her arms. The storm pushed sideways. She stumbled once but kept hold. Snow filled her boots. Her cloak whipped. Again, the sound behind her. A low thump. A slow crunch. She did not look back. She moved faster. She reached the birch line. The longhouse stood ahead in the blur of snow. She hurried. The wind pushed harder. She stepped onto her walkway. The door cloth shook in the wind. She reached the door and kicked it with her boot. She slipped inside. She dropped the wood beside the hearth. She shut the door fast. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Her hands shook. She warmed them near the fire. Heat stung her skin again. Leif woke. "Mother?" She knelt beside him. "I am here." He sat up, weak. "You look cold." "I am fine," she said. She brushed snow from her cloak. She added one piece of the new wood to the fire. Flames rose higher. Warmth spread across the room. Svala rubbed her hands together. Leif whispered, "Did you hear anything outside?" "Yes," she said. "Wind." Leif stared at her face. "Something else." She stayed silent. Leif lowered his voice. "Something heavy." Svala touched his hand. "Sleep again. I stay awake." He closed his eyes. Svala watched the fire. She thought about the sound behind the pine. She knew the weight of footsteps. Wolves stepped fast and light. Bears hibernated now. Men stepped uneven. This sound moved slow, heavy, measured. She did not like the shape of it. She stood and stepped to the door. She lifted the cloth a little. Snow blew in. Darkness pressed against the opening. She saw nothing. She lowered the cloth. She sat by the hearth again. She watched the flames rise and fall. She listened to the walls creak. The storm roared. Leif slept. Time passed slow. She added another log. Leif stirred again. "Mother." "Yes." "I hear wind, but something else under it." "What?" "A deep sound." She tilted her head. She listened. The storm drowned all noise. But under it, she felt a shift, a low vibration, faint, like a large creature moving far away, steps too heavy for anything she knew. She stood. She walked to the window slit. She placed her eye near it. Snow covered the view. A faint shape moved between trees. Too large. Too slow. Her breath caught. She backed away. She whispered, "Not now." She checked the fire. She checked the door. She checked the beams. Winter pushed hard tonight, and something else moved with it. Hours passed. Svala kept the fire alive. Leif slept. Snow piled high against the walls. The longhouse groaned. The storm pressed harder. Near dusk, the wind lowered for a moment. Svala stepped outside to check the wood. She saw a set of prints in the snow near the birch trees. Large, deep, wider than any she knew. She stared at them. The prints faced her home. She whispered, "What walks near us?" She stepped back inside fast and secured the door. She sat beside Leif. Her hands trembled. She forced her breath slow. Leif opened his eyes. "Mother, what did you see?" She placed her hand on his cheek. Not danger yet, he swallowed. But soon? She nodded once. He pressed into her cloak. She held him. The fire crackled. Snow hissed on the roof. The world outside waited with slow, cold weight. Svala whispered into his hair. We survived this night. He closed his eyes again. Outside, the wind rose once more. The prince stayed under falling snow. The shape behind the trees waited. Winter pressed closer, and Svala listened to every sound. Night pressed against the longhouse again. The storm eased, but the cold deepened, the kind that sank into bone, the kind that stopped breath if someone stayed outside too long. Svala fed the fire with thin pieces of wood. She saved the thicker pieces for the darkest hours. Leif slept again, curled close to the hearthstones. His breath sounded steadier now, though weak. Svala listened. The wind no longer roared. It whispered along the walls instead. Soft, slow, careful. She did not trust silence like this. Storms either screamed or died. Silence meant something waited. She stepped to the window slit. She pressed her eye to the narrow opening. Snow fell in small flakes. The birch trees stood still. The forest edge crouched heavy under darkness. Then a sound rose, a low groan. Not wind, not tree, something else. She pulled back from the window. She gripped the edge of the frame. Her breath tightened. Leif stirred. Mother? She turned. Sleep. He sat up slow. I heard it. She knelt beside him. Do not worry. He touched her arm. You worry. She looked toward the door. I listen. He lowered his eyes. What moves outside? She brushed his hair aside. Something large, but not close. He swallowed. Does it want our fire? Fire draws all things, she said. Leif pulled the blanket higher. You stay here. She shook her head. I watch the door. He reached toward her cloak. Do not go out. She placed her hand on his. Not yet. The fire crackled. Shadows moved along the beams. Svala stood again. She stepped to the door. She lifted one corner of the cloth. She let a sliver of cold air slip in. The sound rose again, slow, heavy, snow crushed under weight. A deep breath followed, thick, wet, the breath of something with wide chest and warm body. Svala lowered the cloth and pressed her back against the door. Leif whispered, It walks near us. She sat beside him. Yes. He trembled. She pulled the blanket around both of them. She held him close. She waited. She listened. Minutes passed, then more. The sound moved away from the longhouse. The weight in the snow grew faint, then silent. Svala's breath eased a little. Leif whispered, Will it return? Yes, she said. Why us? He asked. Not us, she said. It follows warmth. It follows strength. It follows anything alive in storms like this. Leif leaned into her. We stay alive. Yes, she said. They stayed near the fire until the light grew steady. Svala fed the flames with one thick log. Heat rose strong. The longhouse warmed enough for breath to stop shaking. Leif fell asleep again. His chest moved steady now. His color shifted back toward normal. Svala watched him long. Relief softened her shoulders. But hunger pressed now. She checked the food, only enough for one full meal, and maybe one more half portion if she stretched it. The storm from earlier trapped small game. The cold pushed deer towards deeper forest. Fish hid under frozen water. She needed more food soon, before hunger weakened Leif again. She stepped to the door once more. She listened. Silence. No heavy steps, no groans, only the soft fall of snow. She grabbed her cloak. She reached for her boots. Leif's eyes opened. Mother? She turned. I go only to check the yard. He nodded slow. Do not walk far. I stay in sight, she said. She stepped outside. The cold stabbed her skin. The air felt sharper than before. But the wind stayed low. Snow fell in thin flakes. Light from the longhouse spilled across the ground. She walked toward the birch line. Her boots crunched in the snow. She looked down. The large prints from earlier still showed faint shapes under fresh flakes. She knelt and brushed more snow aside. The prints were wide, deep, wider than a bear, longer than a moose. She ran her fingers along one edge. The shape curved forward. A claw mark pressed at the front. 3 long grooves, far apart. Her breath steadied in her throat. She whispered, "What walks here?" The prints led toward the forest. They disappeared under deeper snow. She stood. She looked at the trees. She stepped closer. The forest edge stayed dark, too dark. A soft crack came from inside the trees. Svala froze. Her hand moved to her belt knife. She stepped back. She kept her eyes fixed on the trees. The darkness hid whatever moved there. Then the sound faded. She walked backward until she reached the longhouse door. She slipped inside and shut it fast. Leif looked at her from the hearth. "You saw something." She knelt beside him. "Prince." "Large?" he asked. "Yes." He covered his mouth with his blanket. "Does it wait for us?" "It waits for something," she said. Leif lowered his eyes. "We stay inside." "We stay warm," she said. She checked the fire. She added more wood. Flames rose bright. She stepped to the shelf and grabbed dried fish. She broke a piece and placed it in the pot with water. She added barley. She stirred until it warmed. Leif sat up. She handed him a small bowl. He ate slow. His hands shook less now. She ate a small amount too. When they finished, Svala stood again. She stepped near the window slit. She watched the snow. She felt the air shift. The cold deepened again. Then the prince in her mind returned. That size, that weight. No hunter in the valley knew animals like that. No story in the village spoke of such shape. She whispered, "Something from deeper wild." Leif heard her. "From the mountains?" "Maybe," she said. He swallowed. "What if it waits for fire to die?" "We keep fire alive," she said. He nodded. Hours passed. Svala kept the fire strong. She checked the door every little while. She listened. Late into the night, she heard steps again, slow, heavy. Snow hissed under each one. She stood still, her breath quiet. She stepped to the door. She pressed her ear against the wood. A long, slow breath rose. Outside, then another, then one heavy thump. She whispered, "It stands in the yard." She reached for her cloak. She threw it over her shoulders. She grabbed a burning stick from the fire. She held the flame at her side. Leif sat up fast. "Mother," she met his eyes. "Stay," he trembled. "Do not go near it." She stepped to the door. She lifted one corner of the cloth. She leaned her eye near the gap. A shape moved in the snow, huge, tall, near the birch tree. It shifted slow. It looked toward the longhouse. Snow fell across its back. Its breath rose in thick clouds. She saw its head lift. She saw the width of its shoulders. She saw long arms reach toward a branch. She lowered the cloth fast. Her heart pounded. Her fingers tightened around the burning stick. Leif whispered from across the room. "How big?" She swallowed. "Large." He pulled the blanket up to his nose. "Does it see us?" "Not inside," she said. She walked to him. She placed the torch in a safe place near the fire. She knelt beside him. She kept her voice low. "We stay quiet." He nodded. The creature outside stepped closer. Snow cracked under its weight. Svala felt the vibration through the floor. She placed her hand on Leif's back. Steps moved toward the wall. Slow, careful, heavy. The wall creaked under a soft press. One long breath flowed through the wood. Leif squeezed Svala's sleeve. She whispered, "It tests the warmth." Another breath pressed through the wall. Svala watched the beams bow slightly. She held Leif tighter. Then silence. Then the sound of heavy steps moving away. 1, 2, 3. The sound faded toward the forest. Svala let out a slow breath. Her shoulders slumped with relief. Leif whispered, "It leaves?" "For now," she said. He shuddered. "What does it want?" "Warmth, food, life," she said. He swallowed. "Does it kill?" She looked into his eyes. "If it must." Leif pulled the blanket tighter. "It smells our fire." "Yes." "Then we fight?" he whispered. "We survive," she said. He nodded and rested his head on her shoulder. Svala held him until his breath steadied again. She sat with him until he drifted back to sleep. She watched the fire. She added the last thick piece of wood. She needed more by morning. She brushed hair from Leif's forehead. His skin felt warm again. She kissed his head. She stood and walked toward the window slit. She looked out. Snow covered the yard. The large prints moved toward the forest. She counted them, each step long, each mark deep. She whispered, "I find food, I find wood, I stay alive." She sat by the fire until dawn touched the sky. Weak, pale, winter morning. Svala stood. She looked once at Leif. He slept deep and calm now. She took her cloak. She prepared to step outside again. Dawn broke with weak light. The storm eased, but the cold turned sharper, the kind that stiffened fingers within minutes, the kind that shut lungs if someone breathed too fast. Svala stepped to the door and pressed her hand against the wooden beam. Frost coated the inside edge. The longhouse walls creaked under the weight of snow outside. Leif still slept. His breath came steady. His face warmed near the fire. Svala touched his cheek. His fever lowered. His chest no longer shook. Relief touched her, but only for a moment. Hunger waited still. Their food stores faded fast. The fire needed constant feeding. And the tracks outside showed something large watched them. She knew the day held danger. She also knew she stepped into the cold again. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders. She pulled her fur-lined boots on. She tied a leather strip around her sleeves. She checked her knife. She stepped to the hearth and lifted a burning stick. She held it near the fire until the end glowed strong. Leif's eyes opened. "Mother," she knelt beside him. "I look for food." He shook his head weak. "It waits outside." "I know," she said. "Do not go," he whispered. She held his hand. "I walk only to the forest edge." He stared at her. Fear filled his eyes. "It followed your steps last night." "I saw the prints," she said. "I step careful." He swallowed. "Bring spear." She touched his forehead. "The spear stays to guard you." He shut his eyes, but not from sleep, from worry. She stood. She pulled her hood up. She stepped to the door. She lifted the cloth and slipped outside. Cold hit her hard, sharp, deep. Snow reached her knees. The wind stayed low now, but the air felt heavy with frost. She looked toward the birch line. The prints from the creature still marked the snow, half filled by new flakes, still large, still wide. She whispered, "Move fast." She pushed toward the forest edge. Her boots sank deep. She breathed slow to avoid burning her lungs. Her fingers stiffened fast. She kept the burning stick raised to warm her hand. She reached the first pine. She leaned against it. She looked around. Snow covered the forest floor in deep waves. She stepped farther into the trees. The air changed here, still cold, but quieter. The pines blocked the wind. Sound carried better. She listened. Only her breath, only faint wind, no heavy steps. She moved between the trunks. She searched for rabbit tracks. She searched for fallen branches. She searched for signs of winter birds. But the forest looked empty, silent, hard. She walked deeper. She saw a narrow trail where snow pressed down lighter. Rabbit trail, thin, tight. She followed it. The trail curved around a broken trunk. She crouched. She saw a hole near the roots. Warm air drifted from it. The rabbit hid inside. She took a small stick. She pressed it near the hole. She waited. The rabbit moved. She thrust her hand fast. She grabbed soft fur. She pulled it out, kicked weak from hunger. She ended its struggle fast. She whispered, "Forgive this." She placed the rabbit into her pouch. She looked around again. She saw a second trail near a cluster of stones. She followed it. She found a second rabbit stuck under fallen snow. It struggled to free itself. She lifted it. Her hand shook from cold. She pressed it under her cloak to keep it from freezing. She now had food for the night. Enough for broth. Enough to keep Leaf strong one more day. She turned back. Then she heard it. A low crunch, far but heavy. She froze. She crouched near a pine trunk. She held her breath. She listened. Another crunch. Then a long breath. Warm, wide, thick. Her stomach tightened. She whispered to herself, "It wakes." She stayed still. She pressed her back against the tree. Snow dropped from a branch above her. She did not move. She looked through the trees. A shape moved beyond the birches. Not close to her yet, but close to her home. Her pulse rose fast. She needed to reach Leaf. She held the burning stick tight. She moved slowly at first, then faster. She stepped between the trees with quiet steps. She kept the rabbits close to her chest. The heavy sound moved again. She heard it shift weight. She heard snow break under large feet. She reached the forest edge. She knelt behind a birch trunk. She watched the yard. A huge shape walked near the longhouse. Taller than a man, shoulders wide, arms long, it moved slow. It turned its head toward the roof. Its breath rose in heavy clouds. Her throat tightened. She pressed her hand over her mouth to steady her breath. The creature stepped closer to the wall. It sniffed the air. It breathed near the wood. The beams creaked. Leif stayed inside, alone. Svala held the burning stick firm. She stepped out from behind the tree. She stepped toward the yard. Snow cracked under her feet. The creature lifted its head. It turned toward her. Its shape grew clear, its body covered in thick fur, dark, wet from frost. Muscles shifted under it. Its face stretched forward with long jaw and heavy brow. Its eyes glowed faint yellow in the dim light. It looked at Svala. She raised the burning stick high. She shouted, "Away from my home!" Her voice broke the quiet. The creature jerked its head. It stepped back one pace. Snow shifted under its weight. She took a step forward. The flame flickered in her hand. She held it high toward its face. "Leave," she said. The creature sniffed the air again. It stepped sideways. Its eyes never left her. It moved slow, careful. It circled toward the far side of the house. Svala followed it with steady steps. She did not run. She did not tremble. She breathed slow to keep her heart from shaking her voice. She shouted again, louder, "Go!" The creature growled low, not anger, warning. It lowered its head. It stepped backward into deeper snow. Its breath came stronger. Steam rose from its fur. Svala raised the flame higher. She stepped forward again. The Sahin creature paused. It studied her. It blinked slow. Then it turned and stepped toward the forest. It did not run. It walked with long strides, heavy, slow. It disappeared behind the birch line. Snow fell behind it, covering its path. Svala's breath broke loose. She dropped to one knee. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled. She held the burning stick tight until the flame hurt her skin. She whispered, "Thank you." She stood again. She walked fast toward the longhouse. She kicked snow off her boots and slipped inside. Leif sat up. "Mother!" She knelt beside him and placed her hand on his cheek. "I am here." He looked at her cloak. "You found food?" "Yes," she said. "2 rabbits." He smiled, weak. Then his face tightened. "I heard heavy steps." "Yes," she said. He swallowed. "It came close?" "Yes." He pulled the blanket up to his chin. "Did you see its face?" She hesitated. "Enough." He stared at her. "Does it return?" "Yes," she said. "But not now." She stood and placed the rabbits near the hearth. She cleaned them with fast hands. She cut small pieces for stew. She boiled water. She added barley. She added herbs from the small pouch near the wall. Leif watched her from his place by the fire. "You scared it." She shook her head. "No, I warned it." He nodded slow. "It knows you now." She stirred the pot. "Yes." She handed him a warm bowl. He ate slow but steady. His color returned again. Strength touched his fingers. Svala ate as well. Her stomach no longer clenched from hunger. When the meal ended, she fed the fire again. She added wood from the stack she gathered earlier. Flames rose strong. Leif whispered, "Mother." "Yes." "Where does it sleep?" "In deeper forest," she said. "Why come here?" She looked at the door. "Snow drives hunger. Hunger drives courage." Leif rested his head against her shoulder. "We survive him." "We survive winter," she said. He closed his eyes. Svala wrapped a fur around him. She watched the window slit. Snow fell soft now. The sky darkened again. She knew the creature walked somewhere out there. Alone. Hungry. Searching. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I search farther." Night settled over the longhouse. The fire warmed the room. Leif slept. Svala stayed awake. She listened to every sound. She touched her knife handle often. The prints in the yard. The breath against the wall. The shape in the snow. She knew this winter held more than storms. And she prepared for it with steady breath. Morning broke with a pale, thin sun. Light touched the snow in soft sheets, but the cold did not ease. The air still held sharp edges. Frost covered the inside of the longhouse windows in white lines. Svala sat near the fire, with Leif leaning against her side. He ate small pieces of warm stew left from the night before. His hands shook less. His breath felt stronger, but his body still looked tired. Svala watched him finish the last bite. "You grow stronger," he nodded, "because you walked out into the storm." She brushed his hair back. "Because you fought to stay alive." He blinked slow. "I heard it again, before light." Svala looked toward the door. "Where?" "Near the birch trees," he said. Soft, slow, one long breath. She tightened her jaw. "It passed." Leif pulled the blanket over his legs. "Does it watch us?" Svala stood and looked at the door. "I step outside." He reached out. "Mother." She took his hand. "I stay close." She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped out. Cold punched the air from her lungs. She breathed slow until her chest steadied. Snow lay thick and untouched near the forest edge. But near the birch trees, she saw the prints again, fresh ones, deep ones. They moved toward the longhouse. They circled once, then they moved away toward the deeper woods. She crouched beside one print. She placed her hand beside it. Her hand fit inside the curve of its shape, with space left on every side. She whispered, "It grows bold." She followed the prints until they reached the edge of the pines. The trees stood tall, their trunks dark and still. The prince vanished into the shadows. She stepped back. The cold pressed through her cloak. She tightened it around her body. She turned toward the longhouse. She walked back with slow steps, listening to every shift of snow. Inside, Leif waited with worried eyes. She shut the door and knelt beside him. He asked, "Close?" She nodded. "But gone now." He lowered his voice. "Does it hunt us?" "It hunts life," she said. Leif looked at the fire. "We live. We stay warm," she said. She checked their wood. Enough for half a day. Enough to keep flames steady until dusk. Not enough for night. She needed more. She checked the food. Enough for tonight. Enough for tomorrow morning. Not enough beyond that. She placed her hand on Leif's shoulder. "I search again." His eyes widened. "Not far." "I search near the rocks," she said. "Not the deep forest." He leaned into her side. "I hear things near the rocks too." She tilted her head. "What things?" He closed his eyes to remember. "Light steps, not heavy, not like the large one. Something small, something fast." She frowned. "Small?" He nodded. "I hear it when storms stop." She thought for a moment. "Fox? Hare?" He shook his head. "Faster, softer." She hesitated. "Bird?" He shook his head again. Svala looked toward the window slit. Light touched the snow in faint gold. The cold still pressed hard. She grabbed her boots and put them on. She wrapped her cloak tight around her chest. She placed a fur around Leif. "I return before the sun moves," she said. He nodded slow, though his eyes stayed full of worry. Svala lifted the doorcloth and stepped out. The cold bit her skin again. Snow rose high against the walls. She stepped toward the rock line near the far side of the yard. This place held crevices where animals hid from storms. She moved slow and careful. She listened for heavy breath. She watched for shadows between trees. She reached the rocks. She brushed snow aside from one crack. Only ice. She checked another. A bird nest from summer, empty. She walked around the largest stone. She looked down. Tracks, thin ones, light ones. They crossed each other in quick lines. Not hare, not fox. Something else. Something she did not know. She crouched. She touched the tracks. The snow inside them stayed soft. Fresh. She whispered, "What leaves these?" She followed the tracks around the stone. They moved toward the forest edge. They circled the birch trees. They passed near the longhouse. They did not step toward her smaller woodpile. They did not search for food. They moved with no clear path. She followed them farther. They led to a low bush frozen under snow. She knelt. She lifted a branch. Under it, she saw small claws. Sharp. A print too long for fox, too narrow for wolf, too curved for bird. She touched the shape with her finger. She shivered. She stood fast and looked around. The air stayed still. Snow fell soft. But something small and strange moved in this valley. Something she did not know. Something that moved near the same place the large creature walked. She turned back toward the longhouse. Halfway there, the world shifted. The wind paused. The cold thickened. The air fell silent. Too silent. Svala froze. She looked to the forest edge. A shadow moved behind the pines. She held her breath. Her fingers dropped to her knife. She watched the trees. Something large moved between trunks. A slow shape. Heavy. Familiar. Her throat tightened. She stepped slowly backward. She kept her eyes locked on the trees. The creature stepped into light. Not the same one from before. Smaller, but still large. Still wide. Still covered in thick, dark fur. It stood taller than any man. It craned its neck toward her. Its eyes glowed pale. It sniffed the air. Svala raised her burning stick, but she carried none now. Her hands were empty except for her knife. She whispered, "Move slow." She stepped back again. The creature stepped forward. Snow cracked under its feet. Its breath came in long white clouds. It stared at her with slow thought. She reached the edge of her yard. She kept stepping back until her feet touched the walkway near her door. She reached behind her with one hand. Her fingers found the wooden frame. She whispered toward the door, "Leif, stay where you are." The creature lowered its head. It sniffed again. Then it lifted one arm, long, thick, heavy with muscle. It took one slow step toward her. Svala's breath shook. She raised her knife. Her arm trembled. Her voice cracked. "Stop!" The creature paused. Its breath touched the air in slow waves. Its eyes blinked once, twice. It lowered its arm. Then a sound rose from the forest. A long, heavy call, deep enough to shake snow from branches. The creature turned its head. It listened. It stepped back. Then again. Then it turned away from the longhouse and moved toward the deeper trees. It did not run. It walked slow. It disappeared behind the pines. Svala waited until she heard nothing. She breathed again, her knees weak, her chest tight. She stepped backward until she reached the door. She slipped inside. Leif stood near the hearth, eyes wide. "Mother," she knelt beside him and held his face in her hands. "I am here." "Did it come near you?" he whispered. "Yes," she said. "Did it touch you?" "No." He swallowed. "Why did it leave?" She looked toward the forest through the window slit. "Because something stronger called it." Leif's voice shook. "Something stronger?" She nodded. "The one from the storm night." His breath quickened. "The largest one." "Yes." He pressed his face against her arm. "Why does it not enter our yard?" "It waits," she said. "For what?" he whispered. She looked at their fire. "For weakness." Leif shuddered. "Then we stay strong." "We must," she said. She warmed his hands near the fire. She lit a new stick from the hearth. She held it up like a torch. She looked at the door. She whispered, "If it enters, I stand first." Leif whispered back, "I stand with you." She shook her head. "You stay behind me." Leif nodded slow. They sat beside the fire. She fed it with more wood. The flames rose bright. The longhouse warmed again. She held Leif close. She watched the window. Snow fell quiet. Light faded. The forest breathed slow and heavy. Svala whispered, "Tonight, we prepare." Leif leaned into her. "For what?" "For the cold that comes," she said, "and the creature that follows it." Night fell slow, but deep. The sky held no stars, no moon, only black air. The forest stood still in that darkness. Snow fell in thin lines. The longhouse walls creaked under shifting frost. Svala sat near the fire with Leif's head on her lap. She brushed his hair with slow hands. His breath came steady now, his fever gone. His strength returned in small pieces, but fear sat in both of them. Leif whispered, "It waits out there." "Yes," Svala said. "Will it return tonight?" "Yes," he swallowed. "Why tonight?" Svala looked at the door. "Because hunger sharpens when the cold grows deepest, and tonight the cold sinks farther." Leif touched her cloak. "We have wood." "Enough for hours," she said. "Not enough for morning." "We must gather more," he whispered. "Not tonight," she said. But even as she said the words, she looked at the woodpile. Only 3 logs left. Enough to last until late night. Not enough for dawn. Leif saw where she looked. "No," he said. "You do not go outside again." Svala touched his cheek. "I must." Leif shook his head. "The creature waits." She nodded. "Yes." He trembled. "Then you stay." She closed her eyes. If fire dies, you die. I do not allow that. He looked down. He whispered, Then I come with you. No, she said. He clenched his fists. If you fall, I die too. She placed her forehead against his. I return. He shook his head again. Tears filled his eyes. Svala wiped them away. You stay near fire. You stay alive. That is your strength. Leif whispered, I fear you freeze. She kissed the top of his head. I fear that too, but I go. She stood. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders. She lifted a burning stick from the fire. The flame touched her face with warm light. She moved toward the door. Leif grabbed her sleeve. Do not speak to it. I do not, she said. Do not look at it, he whispered. I try not to, she said. Do not fall, he whispered with shaking voice. I stand, she said. She opened the door and stepped into the night. Cold slammed into her body. The air felt heavier than the last storms. Her breath froze the moment it left her mouth. She stepped into the snow. She held the flame high. She looked toward the woodpile. It lay half buried again. She walked toward it. Snow reached her knees. The darkness pressed around her. Only the torchlight cut a small circle. She grabbed one log, then another, then the last one she could reach. She stacked them in her arms. A sound broke behind her, low, heavy, a long breath. She turned her head. The creature stood near the birch trees, the largest one, taller than any roof in the valley. Its eyes glowed faint. Its breath poured out in fog. Snow clung to its fur. It did not move. It watched her. She held the torch up. The flame flickered weak in the cold. The creature lowered its head. It sniffed the air. She whispered, Step back. Her voice trembled. The creature stepped forward. One heavy step, then another. Svala stepped backward toward the door. The logs pressed against her chest. The torch flickered again. The cold ate its fire. The creature stopped 10 paces away. It stood tall, broad, silent. It stared at her with slow thought. Svala felt her knees weaken. She steadied herself. She breathed slow and forced her voice steady. Not my home, she said. The creature tilted its head. Snow fell from its fur. It breathed once, deep. Then it stepped closer. Svala retreated until her back hit the door. She reached behind her with one hand. She pushed the wood with the other. She whispered, Leif. The door opened a crack. Leif reached out and grabbed the logs. He pulled them inside. She held the torch high. The creature stepped closer again. Its breath poured across the snow. Svala grabbed the edge of the door. She shouted, Now! Leif yanked her inside. She stumbled backward. The door dropped shut. The creature's breath hit the wall on the other side. The longhouse shook. Leif grabbed her arm. Mother! She lifted the burning stick and held it toward the door. The flame burned low. She placed it near the fire until it flared bright again. Leif hugged her waist. It stood right there. Yes, she said. Did it touch you? He whispered. No, she said. He pulled back and looked at her face. Why does it not break the door? It tests, she said. It waits for weakness. Leif shook. It hurt us. It smells heat, she said. She added the new logs to the fire. Flames roared high. Warmth filled the room again. They both sat near the hearth. Svala watched the door. Leif watched her. Minutes passed. Silence grew heavy. Then the creature stepped around the house. Snow cracked under its feet. It moved slow. It breathed near the wall. Its shadow passed across the window slit. Leif grabbed her arm. It circles. Yes, she said. It searches for entry, he whispered. Yes. The creature pressed its weight against the far wall. Wood creaked. Snow fell from the roof. Svala rose. She grabbed the burning stick. She held it high. "Stand back," she told Leif. He stepped behind her. The creature pressed again. The wall held. Barely. Svala raised her voice. "Away!" Her shout broke through the quiet night. The creature stopped. It stepped back. It breathed once more. Then it moved away from the wall. Its steps grew faint, then silent. Leif exhaled hard. "It leaves." "Not far," she said. She stood for a long time, listening to the cold. Snow fell steady. The forest breathed slow. Leif sat beside her. "Mother." "Yes. Tell me truth." She looked at him. He whispered, "Do we survive this winter?" She placed her hand on his cheek. "Yes," he swallowed. "Because we fight. Because we endure," she said. He leaned into her side. "Will it come again tonight?" "Yes," she said, trembled. "Then we stay awake." "We take turns," she said. He nodded. "I stay first." "No," Svala said. "You sleep. Your strength returns first." Leif shook his head slow. "If you fall asleep, it enters." She looked at him. His eyes held fear, but also resolve. She nodded. "Then we stay together." He leaned against her shoulder. She wrapped her arm around him. They sat beside the fire. She fed it often. She watched the door. She listened to the forest. Hours passed. Snow piled high. Wind grew thick, but the creature did not return, not for now. Near dawn, the fire still burned strong. Leif slept upright against her. Svala lifted his head and laid him down near the hearth. She looked toward the door again. A faint track pressed into the snow just beyond the window slit. Fresh, single, from the creature. It walked by. It watched. It waited. And it left. Svala whispered, "This winter sharpens life." She sat beside Leif. She stroked his hair. She listened to the fire. Tomorrow held more danger. Tomorrow held more cold. But they lived through this night, and she planned the next steps with steady breath. You watch Svala stand against cold that stops hearts today. You stayed with her through each breath she fought to keep warm. Her winter ends for now, but the valley holds more stories, more storms, more families who survived with strength and small fires. Stay close for the next tale. A quiet gift waits in the next video. Take one slow breath before you leave. Rest your shoulders. You earned calm tonight.